Community Development, the Director of Vermont Emergency Management, as well as the Department of Children and Families, which may seem like a little bit of an outlier, but they are the department within state government that has responsibility for much of our work around weatherization, as well as the Department of Public Service. In addition, there are 15 members that were appointed by the legislature to represent different stakeholders with interests in climate action. The legislature had 60 days from enactment of the bill to make their appointments, and the Climate Council met for the first time on November 20th of 2020. We've met 9 times now. As you might expect, all of our meetings have taken place in a virtual format. It's a bit challenging for such a large organization, but feel like we are making heady progress. The statute also establishes a series of subcommittees that are really charged with doing the technical work, and we'll talk a little bit more about those subcommittees, but they're now meeting weekly. And the other thing the Global Warming Solutions Act did beyond establish the Climate Council and create the directive for us to adopt a climate action plan by December 1st of next year was to take Vermont's existing greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals and turn them into requirements. There are goals that take effect in 2025, 2030, and 2050. The 2025 goal is consistent with the commitments we made relative to the Paris Climate Accords, as well as then were reiterated by the state of Vermont by when we became members of the United States Climate Alliance in 2017. And that's a goal of not less than 26% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 levels. In addition, there is a requirement to achieve a 40% reduction from 1990 greenhouse gas emissions levels by 2030, as well as a commitment to achieve a reduction of not less than 80% from 1990 greenhouse gas emissions levels by January 1st of 2050. So just to offer a little more context, as you may have seen in the press, the agency did release our most recent greenhouse gas emissions inventory just a couple weeks ago. These inventories are delayed somewhat, but so the one that was most recently released covers the period through 2017. And as of the end of 2017, Vermont is currently emitting about 8.66 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents a year. For most intents and purposes, our 2017 emissions are roughly the same as our emissions were in 1990. But so we are well on our way. I think it could be said to the 2025 goal, but by 2030, we need to be at 5.19 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents. And so that's a really significant reduction we need to achieve, and a lot of work that remains to be done. Just so folks can have a sense of what's possible within a year, from 2016 to 2017, Vermont's emissions declined by about 0.4 million metric tons in a single year, and we need to achieve roughly 3.5 million metric tons reduction over the next 9 years. So quite a bit of work lies ahead of us. And with that, I will turn it over to Jane to provide a little additional context around our emissions, as well as talk about the work of the council itself.
Thanks so much, Secretary Moore. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, great. It's hard when you're sharing your screen. So just to pick up where Secretary Moore left off, this chart that is up on the screen right now provides some context of where we have been and where we need to go with respect to the reductions around emissions. It also is very illustrative about where and what sectors are generating the most emissions in Vermont. Vermont trending nationally, but above the national trend a bit, is most of our emissions comes from transportation. The pie on the right shows that almost 45% of our emissions come from transportation. Thermal makes up the next largest component at almost 30% of our emissions at 27.5%. And then differing from national is the next largest sector is agriculture, with 12.5%. I could hardly read for a minute. I thought it was actually more. Electricity, and then industry, and then rounding it out with waste management. One of the unique things about the Global Warming Solutions Act is that our responsibility to cut emissions is intended to be proportional across where we generate them. So I think that's important to keep in mind as we think about the goals with meeting the climate action plan. And just to give credit, this graphic and chart is taken from the Energy Action Network's 2019 progress report, which is actually being updated right now, and this week is rolling out with the 2020. So the Vermont Climate Action Plan, which really is the body of work that the Climate Council and the subcommittees are working on right now, marching towards that December 1st due date of when the Climate Council itself will adopt the plan. The statute that is the Global Warming Solutions Act highlights a number of areas, specific initiatives, programs, and strategies that plan will encompass and address. And just to set the stage for a robust conversation and to have questions asked, I thought it would be important to sort of run through those. So first and foremost, this plan is going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from those sectors that were just highlighted on the chart. First and foremost being transportation, building, and then beyond with respect to the regulated utility, industrial, commercial, and agricultural sectors. We also want to encourage smart growth and related strategies, and also work to achieve long-term sequestration and storage of carbon, as well as promoting best management practices to achieve climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience on our natural working lands. Further along, the requirements of the Climate Action Plan will also look to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 across all sectors. That is, we want to balance our emissions that we're emitting with the amount that we're able to sequester with respect to carbon in Vermont through our natural and working lands. We want to reduce energy burdens for rural and marginalized communities, as well as limit the use of chemicals, substances, or products that contribute to climate change. And finally, we want to build and encourage climate adaptation and resilience of Vermont communities and natural systems. So specifically, there are objectives that we want to actually hit with the Climate Action Plan that will get us to advance these goals. So prioritizing the most cost-effective, technologically feasible, and equitable greenhouse gas emissions reduction pathways, adaptation, and preparedness. We want to provide for greenhouse gas emissions reductions that reflect the relative contribution of each source of the emissions. So what I spoke to earlier with respect to if transportation is emitting the most, then we'll likely look to cut, well, we will be required to look to cut the most emissions from that sector. Specifically, we want to minimize negative impacts on marginalized and rural communities and individuals with low and moderate incomes. And we want to ensure that all regions of the state benefit from these reductions. Finally, we want to support economic sectors and regions of the state that face the greatest barriers to emissions reductions. Really, this will come and as we start to think about how our subcommittees think about strategies for rural communities, as well as economically distressed regions and industries. We want to support industries, technology, and training that will allow workers and businesses in the state to benefit from greenhouse gas reduction solutions, ensuring that just transition of the economy as we decarbonize. We want to support the use of natural solutions, including working lands, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as sequestering carbon and increasing resilience. And finally, we want to maximize the state's involvement in interstate and regional programs and initiatives to reduce emissions, taking advantage of partnerships at multiple levels. So in the statute, 4 subcommittees were articulated. Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, Just Transition Subcommittee, and the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. Those 4 subcommittees were in statute, and the work of the Climate Action Plan is really being done and brought up within those subcommittees right now. So Rural Resilience and Adaptation is speaking to the resiliency work that we need to build up into the Climate Action Plan. Cross-sector is really looking at the strategies and recommendations in order to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions at a sector level. The Just Transition Subcommittee is really thinking not only about just transitions for the economic future of Vermont and the workforce, but it's also thinking about how we engage with the Vermont public all along the way to co-create the climate action plan so that we have resulting buy-in that we need to implement such an ambitious plan. And the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee really is thinking first and foremost about sequestration for the state and how we can enhance the sequestration work of our forests and natural and working lands, as well as thinking about resiliency in the ecosystem services space. And then the statute also gave us the ability to set up and put in place any other subcommittees that we thought we needed to do the work of the climate action plan and ultimately its implementation. So the Science and Data Subcommittee was set up in order to inform and think about the science and data needed to create such an ambitious plan and program for the state. Beyond the initiatives and programs and strategies and objectives that I just spoke to, the statute really set out a clear sequence of work for the subcommittees to embark on. And how that's playing out is really, we try to be as illustrative as possible, but we are really working towards a very ambitious timeline with respect to putting forward a climate action plan by December 1st. As Julie alluded to, that the first council meeting was just in November, so it's less than or just over a year really until we have a climate action plan that can be adopted. And all of the work along the way that we need to put in place in order to make those strategies and recommendations real and grounded with the public support, as well as the technical analyses. So we're thinking a lot about public engagement at the core of the development of the climate action plan. We have been doing public engagement since the onset of the statute, but we have some targeted touch points for public engagement now and through the development of the climate action plan, as well as beyond that. And so the Vermonters can be expecting time right now with respect to helping us frame the issues and thinking about what we should be thinking about as we put forward strategies. That information that's collected now with your help will help inform the public engagement plan that will guide us through the testing of the strategies and recommendations, as well as the prioritization and vetting of the climate action plan itself, and then the long-term implementation strategies. All along the way, we'll also be learning and further refining our understanding of the modeling and what the science tells us, from critiquing the way we measure our greenhouse gases to thinking about how we view sequestration in a carbon budget, thinking about how the implications of our strategies and recommendations have on the economics of Vermont, the cost to the Vermont public, as well as the opportunity with respect to job creation and beyond. And we'll also be thinking about the long-term work of monitoring and assessing the decisions that we make through the climate action plan. All of that means different touch points for the subcommittees and the milestones that we need to implement the development of the climate action plan. And so we expect that this summer and fall will present a lot of opportunities for the public to engage with us around the development of those strategies and recommendations, and really be setting the seed for the long-term ongoing work of implementation of the climate action plan, which will be a heavy lift, to say the least. And I'll turn it back over to Julie because to Secretary Moore to speak specifically to the opportunities and investments our state's already making.
Correct. Thank you, Jane. So as part of the America's Rescue Plan Act, there are a series of very significant investments proposed for climate action, both for the coming state fiscal year, which starts on July 1st, as well as a long-term commitment, recognizing that these federal funds are actually available to the state to use through December 31st of 2024. In the FY22 budget that's currently with the governor for review, there are about $65 million worth of total investments related to climate action, including $7.4 million for electric vehicle incentives and vehicle repair incentives, $20 million for continued work around weatherization, with a particular emphasis on lower income Vermonters and their homes. $20 million to help with the development of community scale renewable energy, particularly solar systems, as well as fuel switching in individual homes and buildings. So moving from fossil fuel building heat systems to systems that are either all electric or rely on modern wood heat. There's also a commitment to support the implementation of the state's 2018 hazard mitigation plan, and in particular, work with buildings, so homes and businesses that have seen repeated damage as a result of floods, floods that we know will become more frequent as extreme weather events increase, and try to help those owners move out of harm's way. There's a $10 million commitment to the VHCB Farm and Forest Viability Program that is a cornerstone of efforts to help ensure our natural and working lands remain in agriculture and forestry. And then there's about $2.5 million dedicated to energy planning and coaching work, largely led by the RPCs. In addition, the budget includes a statement of intent that the total investment in climate action over the course of this federal funding cycle will be about $250 million. And this is a great indication that the legislature intends to commit resources to support the implementation of the climate action plan once it's complete, and builds on a recommendation of the governor to do just that, to make some investments in what we've termed no regrets policies right now, things that we know we're going to need to do. We don't need to wait for the climate action plan to tell us, as well as to hold resources in reserve to support that initial implementation of the climate action plan as a recognition of just how much work lies ahead. So I think we'll pause there. Both Jane and I are available to answer any questions folks have. There are two ways to ask questions. There is a chat function, and there's a little bubble in the bar at the top with a couple of lines in it. If you click on that, it will open the chat, and you're welcome to add your question there. Alternatively, there is a hand raise function right next to it, along with a little smiley face emoji. And we can call on people who raise their hands. And then thirdly, if you're calling in, you probably don't have access to either of those functions, but just encourage you to speak up, and look forward to opening the floor and hearing your questions and comments and concerns. David, I see that you have your hand up. You don't have a last name on my list, though.
Yes, my name is David Scopin, and I'm a member of the Essex Energy Committee. And certainly one question I have, I do have a lot of concerns because unfortunately, I think that we're doing too little too late. And I think that most of us, if we look at the science and look how slowly things move in most places, but especially Vermont, we're hoping possibly to be much farther along. Waiting for 2030 seems to be possibly to finally arrive at that goal. It would seem to be we need a kind of yearly goal. But my question is, as a member of the Energy Committee, one thing we realize is that we need someone who has expertise which we do not have, which is to look at Essex as a community with all of its cars and all of its buildings and houses, etc., and help us. I mean, some of the things that I look at, and I see children being taken to school by parents, and I realize that if I encourage them to buy an electric school bus, if less than 100% of the students on average ride the school bus, then I'm not going to meet my goals. But we need someone with expertise in being able to assist. And can you provide that? What would this person be called? And where would we find them?
That's a great question. That is not necessarily a service the Agency of Natural Resources is able to provide, but believe that is the intention behind some of the money that's being directed to the regional planning commissions to support both energy planning and then some of the coaching work to help communities ask those very questions. So I'd encourage you, if you're in Essex, to follow up with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission and see what resources they might be able to help with in the work of your town energy committee.
And Julie, we got a quick question in the chat asking to describe the farm and forest viability program in more detail, how the funds would be committed to that program and how they would be used.
So I can talk in broad strokes about the Farm and Forest Viability Program. Would say that I think it's that we don't have a lot of the details or specifics on any of the initiatives I listed off there yet. The first step was for the administration and the legislature to reach agreement on which initiatives to fund. The next step is to confirm that the initiatives that have been collectively prioritized in the budget are all truly eligible for the federal funding. It's probably inside baseball for most folks, but the Treasury released guidance that tells us how we can actually spend these dollars only within the last couple of weeks, whereas the money has been available, or the states have known what their allocations were going to be for well over 2 months. And so there's been a bit of guessing and thinking about, what's likely to be eligible. So nothing set in stone until we get the final confirmation from Treasury. But the Farm and Forest Viability Project provides service resources to both forest landowners and farm landowners to develop essentially business plans, to look at their operations and establish goals, and then determine how those particular entities or pieces of land can be managed and stewarded in such a way as to meet the landowner's goals and do it in an economically viable fashion. So when it comes to farms, oftentimes it's working with smaller farms that may be going through a generational transition to help them look at diversifying their agriculture and thinking about ways that they can fully use their land. And similarly, supports a lot of work knowing that about 80% of Vermont's forests are privately held, helping those private landowners develop a plan that ensures that those forests can be managed and maintained as forests in a way that supports the landowner's goals. So it's a really important planning program to help ensure that our land use continues in the fashion that it is already. Oh, and I see Jen Holler is on the line too and has her hand up, and is actually from VHCV, so she may wish to add a little bit further clarity in that space. Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you, Secretary Moore. I can, in addition to your really great explanation of the Farm and Forest Viability Program, I couldn't have done that better myself, so thank you for that. But this line item is also envisioned to include conservation projects too. So conservation projects that might help carbon sequestration in the soil or in the forest land, or protect connecting habitat areas or wildlife corridors. So that's also part of what's envisioned in the budget bill as part of that $10 million.
Thank you, Jen, for that additional detail. Anthony, would you like to ask a question?
Sure, I have more of a comment. My name is Anthony Arpino. I am speaking on my own behalf personally, but also from my experience in the renewable energy field. And it's definitely exciting to see the state recognizing the need to shift our cars and trucks and our home heating off of fossil fuels. I agree with the comment earlier from David. We can't get there fast enough, and we've really been moving too slowly as a state, but also as a country. And it's exciting to see the president setting a more ambitious goal for the nation than even the quote unquote green Vermont set for itself. But we know that if we're going to meet this demand and get these transportation and home heating onto the electrical grid, that's actually going to spike the demand for existing renewable electricity that doesn't add to our fossil fuel problem and take what's a small but still meaningful portion of our emissions and grow it. So the challenge is to do that in a way that doesn't increase our reliance on fracked gas, which is a big part of what keeps the New England grid going, and deepen our reliance on Hydro-Quebec, which is an environmentally devastating, also genocidal project to our north that we rely on heavily for renewable, quote unquote, renewable energy. We've got to do more for homegrown renewable energy here. We didn't need the Global Warming Solutions Act to tell us that. And I have to say that it's been frustrating to not feel like from those in the renewable energy field that the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources has been more of a partner in that. There have been a lot of roadblocks erected by the agency that I think in the trade-off have questionable environmental value, are making the cost of doing business in the state of Vermont for renewable energies much higher and much harder, and making it more attractive to develop renewable energy in other states. So I'd really like to encourage the secretary to work throughout the agency and with the leaders of your different departments in creating a regulatory environment where the roads of the rules are clear, the environmental obligations that renewable energy developers are being asked to take on make sense and aren't disproportionate. Just like in the water quality area, I feel like there's a real imbalance in where the ANR chooses to regulate, where agriculture gets lightly regulated, if at all, and renewable energy gets very heavily regulated. So I'd like to encourage the Agency of Natural Resources to be more proactive partner in trying to help us achieve the climate goal, because at the end of the day, it is the biggest environmental threat that we all face. So I appreciate your taking the time to hear us out today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. Jenna Evans, I see you have your hand raised.
Oops, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead, Jenna.
Okay, sorry, headset problems. So I'm a resident of Essex, but I'm also the sustainability manager for Ben & Jerry's. And we, as a global company, have a lot of common goals, with the state of Vermont, and we're obviously working within our areas of influence to try to reduce impact there. And I was curious if there is a plan for the state to be working with businesses like Ben & Jerry's or others that have, strategic public goals that are very much in line with the state. Thanks.
I could speak to that for a moment around our public engagement plan. So we have two consultants, Climate Access and RISE, working with us now to help inform and direct our public engagement between now and next spring. This first phase, phase one, is considered audience analysis, and the components of that we have been thinking a lot about strategic interviews, as well as some roundtables to inform the landscape that is Vermont for climate conversations. And that includes reaching out to people who have traditionally not been included in public engagement with the state, but it also includes reaching out to partners who align with our goals for this work and can be ultimately partners in implementation long-term, as well as amplifiers of the message that we want to communicate. And I know that that includes many businesses, as well as nonprofits and local organizations that will help us reach more Vermonters through their networks and systems. And so that audience analysis and recognition of who's could help us is happening right now. And I suspect that while there'll be limited numbers of roundtables at this juncture, that we will engage. And we've talked a lot about thinking about specific roundtables to engage with Vermont businesses for social responsibility and their partners and beyond. So I expect that there will be a next step with respect to how we engage with businesses, as well as other organizations and Vermonters, to work on this message. I think you're muted, Jenna, but thanks.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Sorry. I would love to have Ben & Jerry's on the list if that's possible, but if it's better for us to just engage through businesses for social responsibility, I can do that as well. Thank you.
I think building on that, I see that there's a question in the chat both about how we're thinking about educating the public, and then, but also specifically asking, and Jane, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, about any educational outreach to students in schools in terms of both teaching about what's happening about climate change in Vermont and also beyond.
That's been a consistent theme and question from subcommittees, ensuring that we're hitting, especially our Vermont youth, with consistent message and themes. We have not made that a central theme yet of our engagement and outreach at the Climate Council level, but I know that subcommittee members are thinking about how they view their roles with respect to engagement and outreach at various touch points and levels. And schools have been one that has been a consistent theme. So I expect that long-term implementation will include engagement and outreach at multiple levels, will certainly include the way we communicate with schools around this work. I think Jocelyn has her hand up too, I saw.
Yes, I saw that as well. Go, Jocelyn.
Oh, hi, thank you. I just had a couple of suggestions. I work a lot in permitting world, and I'm an Act 250 commissioner for District 5. And one of the challenges that I personally see as a commissioner is we have no ability to require a developer to put solar panels on the roofs or to install electric charging vehicles. I think Act 250 is trying to undergo some reform. I think it's an opportunity to place some requirements. We don't even have a statutory criteria to even assess impacts, greenhouse gas impacts, fossil fuel. There's a standard there that requires certain buildings to meet building codes, but beyond that, it has nothing to do with installing renewable facilities or charging stations. So I just wanted to flag that for potential area to look into and think about. And then my second suggestion is more comprehensive. I've been working in the permitting sector since 2005, and I would say in the past 5-6 years, it's more difficult to cite renewable energy projects in Vermont than it is many commercial and industrial kinds of development in Vermont. And I suggest that Director Zorchak, you look into how the Scott administration is putting up roadblock after roadblock for renewable energy projects, and what can your climate committee do about that? Is there an opinion you can issue, a direction? It really has been a drastic change in the past 5 to 6 years, and I'm looking forward to seeing that direction change in a more positive way. So my two suggestions both fall in the proactive permitting bucket. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking to those subcommittee work and just encouraging and reminding folks about the open nature of the work of the Climate Council. So all of the subcommittees and all of the work that is ongoing is posted through the Climate Council website online. I can drop that in the chat in a second. All of those meetings are open and available for the public to sit in on and hear. And over the next 6 to 8 weeks, subcommittees will be rolling up the first bucket of strategies that they're thinking about with respect to how we work forward towards the climate action plan and renewable energy siting, thinking about permitting. All of that will surely be components of the cross-sector mitigation work. And if I may, I might just speak to the question in the chat around cultural barriers to reducing emissions. I will say that the Just Transitions subcommittee has focused its work to date on thinking a lot about the guiding principles that will be the underpinning of all of the strategies and recommendations. And one of those pieces has been a definition for frontline and impacted communities in Vermont. And that work is forthcoming to the subcommittees this week. That will be a guiding guideposts for everybody as we're thinking about strategies and recommendations, as well as feed into what will be an equity assessment to think about the back end as strategies and recommendations come out to ensure their fair consistency across Vermont's landscape. And as a result, I think all of that will also help inform those barriers that you're speaking to with respect to how we put forward strategies and recommendations that not only are equitable, but are also achievable across all spectrums of our population.
And I would just add that we know that one of the challenges is right now there aren't a lot of electric vehicles that are both affordable and sort of suitable to Vermont's climate and road conditions. We are fully anticipating that the market has seen this issue and is working to address it. But that's an obvious challenge too, in that a Prius may not be able to travel all of Vermont's roads under all conditions. And think that growing market space will actually be really important in helping broaden the Vermonters that may have interest in an electric vehicle going forward. I see that there's a comment about specific language and criteria to address resiliency and adaptation. I don't know, Jane, if you want to speak a little bit to the focus of that particular subcommittee and the work they're engaged in.
Sure. So rural resilience and adaptation is thinking about the resiliency of the built environment specifically, as well as adaptation. And thinking about it from sort of two main buckets of work, really, community resilience and all of that that means, and working on definitions for that. So it really speaks to the social and well-being of communities in the face of adapting to climate change, as well as thinking about housing, affordability, that area of work, and then really around infrastructure resilience, and recognizing that the vulnerabilities of our infrastructure, our communities, in the face of an adapting climate. And so that work is really broad in nature and also cross-cutting across multiple subcommittees. So resiliency is also being thought about within ag and ecosystems as they think about the resiliency of Vermont's natural and working lands, as well as nature-based solutions is the term that we've been talking a lot about how we can use nature to adapt to climate change, as well as thinking about how we use it with respect to mitigating climate change impacts.
The next question in the chat is looking at long-term carbon sequestration and specifically asks if industrial hemp will be considered for uses such as fiber in building materials and composites as a sequestration strategy. I can speak to that a little bit in that we are going to develop a carbon budget and think about what these sequestration opportunities look like in terms of both standing timber within our forests, soil carbon, as well as the ability to sequester sequester carbon in building materials. Personally, I've been involved in a regional conversation about mass timber. I haven't been involved in any specific conversations around industrial hemp, but I think it's probably in that same vein, and the idea that looking at ways to incentivize the use of forest products in building construction over traditional steel and concrete has both the benefits of reducing the emissions associated with those materials, as well as sequestering carbon in the building materials themselves. So that is part and parcel of the conversation, and something the Science and Data Committee will be looking into as they develop or review the work of our consultant to develop a carbon budget for the state. I don't know, Jane, if there's anything you'd add there.
No, that was great. Thank you.
All right. And I see the next comment, and I think this is a good one, is concerns about the impact on rural communities as compared to urban areas. I think by many state standards, all of Vermont might be considered rural, but certainly we have some really rural parts, and people do need to travel some distance to get to jobs, to access services, even to buy groceries. And we know that isn't going to change, and that there isn't necessarily a public transit solution to all of these issues. It's something we're very aware of, and we'll be continuing to work with throughout. And as Jane had mentioned, there is a specific direction contained in the Global Warming Solutions Act to make sure we're thinking about the needs of marginalized and I might say difficult to reach communities, which includes some of our most rural areas, and to ensure that we aren't adopting a one-size-fits-all approach that might work in the Burlington area or Chittenden County and be much more difficult to support in the Northeast Kingdom. I don't know, Jane, if there's anything you'd add there.
No, I think that was really great. I think that there's a lot of attention given to rural communities, and thought, I should say, in all of the subcommittees as folks are starting to think about strategies.
There are a number of excellent comments in the chat. I encourage everyone to take a look at them. The next one is speaking to sort of some of the things that come beyond carbon emissions and ways that we can incentivize walking and biking infrastructure. And then the electrical demand considerations that Anthony had referred to in his comments as we look to electrify things, what that's going to mean for our electricity profile, and the need to reduce overall energy demand, just not switch to electric. I think that's an excellent comment.
Yeah.
Elle, from your sort of vantage, have we missed any of the questions in the chat?
Not that I can see.
Are there anyone else who would like to ask a question is welcome to do so. And I'm also happy if folks have questions unrelated to climate action and the Global Warming Solutions Act, but the broader work of the agency, would be happy to hear those as well. All right, I'm not seeing any. Jane, maybe you can just give folks a little glimpse. I know you put up the timeline, but about where we're headed next and what their opportunities will be to weigh in and continue to provide feedback and comment.
Thank you. So the work to date has largely been focused on getting the subcommittees up and running and thinking about their core charges. And we now have officially sort of the milestones in front of us to get us to the December 1st deliverable of the climate action plan. What that means for Vermonters to engage continues to be that we have all of our meetings for the subcommittees, the Climate Council, and the Steering Committee open, and we encourage folks to engage with us as often and frequently as you'd like to through those meetings. We also on that website have a public portal where we are receiving lots of comments where you can direct them specifically to the Climate Council or the Steering Committee or a specific subcommittee of interests. And we make sure that those get to the appropriate subcommittee for review and consideration. Further, the public engagement plan, as I spoke to earlier, is due to be adopted and reviewed by the Climate Council by the end of June, which will set us forward in motion of a lot of touch points with the Vermont public starting in July through August and into the fall. At that point, we'll be testing strategies and recommendations and looking for input from Vermonters around the cost of those to you personally and how you see success for the climate action plan delivery in December. All of those will also be vetted with the technical analysis that I alluded to that will be coming to a head largely in the fall. So I encourage folks to tune in and stay updated through the Climate Council website, as well as figure out ways to engage through public engagement components, which will all be advertised and discussed at those meetings as well. So please stay tuned. I'm not sure, I didn't actually put it in the chat yet, but if Elle hasn't, I'm going to drop it in the chat right now for the Climate Council website.
Yes, I believe Elle dropped it in, but probably helpful to refresh. And it does look like there are a couple more comments that have come up. One is a question about if there's been any discussion around an inexpensive regional commuter rail system in Vermont. I don't know, Jane, if that's come up in the cross-sector mitigation committee. It seems like that might be the most obvious spot for that conversation.
Yeah, so cross-sector mitigation has broken up into the sectors, 4 sectors, buildings and thermal. I saw that comment. I'm sorry that I didn't clarify down from thermal around buildings. Buildings, thermal, as well as transportation, electricity, utilities, and non-energy emissions. All of the work of those 4 sectors are being led by specific task leads. And that work is being funneled up into the subcommittee during the month of June. And so I've been yet to hear sort of forward from those task leads where they're going with their strategies right now, but I can't imagine they're not considering public transportation in the broadest sense and what that could look like. And so I, again, encourage folks to tune into the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee meetings, and June will be a really important time as they funnel in and funnel up the strategies from those 4 sector areas.
And then there's another comment about reinvigorating our village and town centers so that folks that live in rural communities don't have to travel so far for services. That is an excellent suggestion, and frankly, is a separate category of investment that probably should rightly also be listed as part of the overall climate action package. Also with the federal funding, there is $35 million that's been carved off to support investments in village water and sewer systems. We know that these foundational and infrastructure investments are often important in supporting the exact types of projects that you refer to, the ability to have shopping, to have small cafes, add accessory dwelling units and other units of affordable housing that may not exist when a community is relying solely on soil-based disposal systems on the property itself. And so look forward to the opportunities to invest in a number of villages and downtowns and to create those more vibrant town centers so that people don't have to travel as far afield, recognizing that also gets at the point one of the commenters earlier made about promoting walkability and bikeability and ensuring that we are creating communities that are that kind of livable. Other questions or comments before we I close us out?
Hi, this is Mike Kolowski with True North Report. Can you hear?
Yes.
Hello? Oh,
go
great.
ahead.
Okay. Just a general question about the cost of switching over to renewable energy, whether it be driving or heating or energy production. I know one of you mentioned earlier in the call that electric cars, for example, still continue to cost more than their non-electric counterparts. I've heard similar about the cost for electric production when you talked about panels and wind turbines. So my question overall is, how do we face the challenge of switching over to more costly forms of transportation and energy? In general, it's just, isn't it going to be challenging? And either of you can answer.
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then let Jane weigh in. That's a great question, and certainly one of the challenges facing the Climate Council. So in addition to looking at the magnitude of what needs to be done to achieve the requirements that were established in the Global Warming Solutions Act, the council will also be looking at the cost. There's a significant component of the work we've contracted for is economic modeling to get at those numbers, because it's a very important point. And then not only think about the cost, but what are the different financial tools that could be used to help cover those costs. Recognizing that a lot of the things we've been talking about today, vehicles and home and building heat in particular, are going to require changes in individual behavior and in all likelihood incentives to help people make those switches. And so that's a huge area of conversation. And I guess I would say I agree that it's an incredibly important component and encourage you to stay tuned. I don't know, Jane, if there's anything you'd add to that.
No, that was all well said. It's all on the front and center of everybody's minds right now. And that economic modeling, unfortunately, won't be available till the fall. But we do have some preliminary analysis to fall back on and be thinking about from previous bodies of work. And so the EAN network, as well as the Climate Action Commission work a few years ago, we're starting to think about the feasibility of some of the numbers that are being put forward. Secretary Moore has alluded to this in previous remarks, but we currently have 4,000 EVs on the road, but by most numbers, we need north of 10 times that by 2025 in order to actually start to get at the cuts we need to make in transportation emissions. So there's the cost of that to Vermonters and the cost of those vehicles in general, but then there's just the actual question of if those will even be available to Vermonters to buy. So there's a lot to think about as we develop strategies and recommendations about their long-term costs, as well as the feasibility to implement them in the time that we need to. David, I see your hand has gone up again.
Yes, a few comments. The thought that we would switch from gas to electric vehicles scares the daylights out of me because that doesn't get at the problem, which is we drive too much, we drive too fast. We don't get it. We're not looking at the problem that faces us as a community, as a society, as a species. I would think that the one thing we should be putting an amazing amount of money in is figuring out how are we going to change the minds, or how are we going to convince folks that they are part of the problem and part of the solution. Without them being on board, we don't have a chance. And the one thing I'm always amazed at is that not many of us are willing yet to say that out loud in public, that we have to hit the ground running, and thinking about something that's going to happen 6 months, 6 years, or 25 years from now is ridiculous if we want to give our great grandchildren any sort of future whatsoever. I mean, we've already screwed it up to the point where it's going to be pretty amazing in 10 or 20 years. It's going to be very different than it looks like now. And with that, I will silence.
Thank you, David. All right. Not seeing any further comments or hands. I want to just close out by again thanking everyone for making time to attend today. This Tell Me More series is usually a bi-monthly occurrence, although we do take the summers off. So the next Tell Me More session will be in September. We try to send out email announcements and press releases, so keep your eyes peeled for what comes next. If there's a topic you have a particular interest in that fits within the umbrella of the Agency of Natural Resources, feel free to drop it in the chat or send Elle or I an email and let us know. We're always looking for ideas. And again, thank you for the great conversation, the excellent questions, and your comments and feedback. Much appreciated. Be well, everyone.
Thank you.